My name is Stacy Cacciatore. I'm with Clemson University, and today I'm going to be speaking with you guys about a phenomenology of women's recreational running. No one prepared me for living life as a fat person. I reread that statement from Jacqueline Brady several times and reflected on how her mother prepared her for living life as a black woman, but didn't warn her of the teasing, taunting, and judgment she would face as a fat woman. Her entire life she felt immense shame because society told her that being fat was a moral shortcoming. And while she couldn't choose the color of her skin, she chose to be fat. I believe this research resonated with me so deeply because my story is the inverse. My entire life, my mom prepared me to live life as a fat woman. I was a chubby kid, a plump teen, and a fat young adult. And I received the message loud and clear that as a fat person, I needed to maneuver through life differently than someone who was thin. The size of my body pervaded my every movement and thought. I moved through space differently, hyper aware of the space my body took up. In school, I was picked last every time kids had to pick teams. Because my every move was examined, criticized, and ostracized, I learned not to take up space. I stopped trying to swing the bat. I jumped out of the way of the ball rather than catch it, spike it, dribble it, or dunk it. Kids made fun of me when I ran, shouting boom, bada boom with every step I took. "It's okay," my mom reassured me. "People like us aren't good at sports," she said while writing me an excuse note from gym. I was a straight-A student with the exception of PE, which I failed. Needless to say, I wasn't good at sports. I received the pervasive messaging, both intentional and subliminal, that fat bodies like mine weren't meant to move. I was less than because of my body size. I remember the exact moment I made the decision to engage in purposeful physical activity for the first time in my life. I cracked open a Weight Watchers book and read a passage that said, with physical activity, I could lose weight faster. Not groundbreaking, I know. Pretty simple math equation that we hear touted again and again. Eat less, move more. But for some reason in that moment, I decided to stop ignoring the move more part of the equation. Never being one to have patience, I looked up the physical activity that burned the most calories: running. I ate less, I moved more, I began walking and running, then running. I lost weight, 89 pounds to be exact. But weight loss isn't the reason for this story. I share this to say that even now, after I've run 8 full marathons, 90 half marathons, and a multitude of 10Ks and 5Ks, I still suffer from imposter syndrome. It took me a long time to associate with the moniker runner. I didn't feel like a real runner after my first 5K nor 10K. I kept running longer and longer distances until I felt I deserved the title. I couldn't figure out why, no matter how many days, miles, or minutes I ran, I still didn't feel like a runner. Until one day when I was flipping through Runner's World magazine, I realized why I didn't identify with this group. I didn't look like the runners they depicted in magazines. I wasn't fast. I couldn't relate to getting excited about fartleks or negative splits. I didn't have tightly toned legs or spindly arms. Even though I had grown up, lost 89 pounds and ran, I was still the little chubby girl sitting on the sidelines being told I didn't fit in. While I was able to transcend the ideals placed upon me and visualize myself as a runner, my mom could not. She had been larger her entire life. I watched her struggle with her weight. She faced prejudice everywhere she went. From people snickering behind her back at the store, to doctors not taking her ailments seriously, to being denied employment opportunities, she faced adversity her entire life. The messages she received about her body and herself resonated so deeply she couldn't even see herself being active. Activity was for other people, the thin, the accepted, the ideal. She died 4 years ago at the age of 59. Possibly she could have avoided some of the ailments that ultimately led to her early death if she would have engaged in physical activity. Not for the sake of losing weight, which is what turned her off from engaging or even visualizing herself participating. Not for the pervasive reasons we hear in the media, that running leads to weight loss or helps women obtain hegemonic body ideals. Rather, so she could feel the possibilities of what her body could do rather than the space it took up. So she could experience the freedom that mobility provides rather than feeling shame for daring to exist in a fat body. My mom never got that chance. You may wonder how the story of my mom and my struggles with my weight relate to my work on the phenomenology of women's recreational running. I seek to connect these issues of rhetorics, body size, and sports to understand how these intersect. My dissertation will explore the gendered rhetorics of in-person and virtual recreational running events in institutional and vernacular spaces. I would specifically examine how rhetorics are gendered, analyzing things related to the body. Through this research, I seek to answer 3 primary questions. In what ways are everyday rhetorics of women's recreational running gendered? How do rhetorics of recreational running reinforce hegemonic body ideals for women? What are the similarities and differences among institutional and vernacular rhetorics in both in-person and virtual events? Where are marginalized groups being othered and excluded due to their race, size, or class? Is there an opportunity in online spaces, mobile and local media for inclusion and activism? For our conversation today, I first provide an overview of my dissertation purpose and research questions. I will then provide an overview of my methodology. I move into an explanation of the specific methods I will use. I will then share with you, based on my initial readings, the 4 areas that not only span across all my research areas, but they all contradict my initial conjecture. I want to address at the forefront that I was surprised at some of the research I came across in reading for exams, and many of my initial expectations were proven wrong. I think that most people come into their exam defense to talk about how their research corroborates their initial conjecture. However, I'm going to take a risk and do something completely different. I'm going to share with you the 4 findings that I was completely wrong about prior to reading for exams. The discoveries will change the trajectory of my dissertation. These themes span across all 3 of my research areas, which are feminist theories and rhetorics, material bodies and digital spaces, leisure, sport, and size. In doing this, I will share with you my initial expectations for what I thought I would find and what scholars said that proved otherwise. I will end with a summary of how I will apply this research to my study. My methodology for this dissertation is comprised of 4 strands, including phenomenology, everyday feminist materialism, embodied vernacularity, and intersectionality. I will create a bricolage of these methodologies to bring to my research. I first want to explain why I'm starting with phenomenology. Phenomenology, which is the study of consciousness, can serve as a resource for understanding the lived experience of the recreational runner. Feminist writers, including Sonia Crux, Elizabeth Gross, and Iris Young, are carrying forward the work of Simone de Beauvoir and how her phenomenology of the lived experience helps us understand how one is not born but becomes a woman. A major influence for these feminist scholars is Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who postulates that we receive and perceive information of and from the world through our bodies. They contribute to the conversation that phenomenology can help us understand the body not as an object but as lived. Crux argues that phenomenology privileges our inside or consciousness rather than the outside or body. Elizabeth Gross holds that mind-body dualism is central to the philosophy linking meanings between the body, gender, and space. Because throughout history, women have somehow been seen as more biological, corporeal, and natural than men. In Throwing Like a Girl, Young discusses embodiment and how women and men differ in their participation in sports, through how they stand, hit a bat, and run. I seek to build upon the solid foundation and expand the conversation by outstanding scholars in the field, including Michelle Smith's methodology of exploring the gendered lived experience of women, Sarah Hallenbeck's feminist materialist methodology, Jordan Jack's rhetorics of gendering, Jessica Enoch's call for redefining what counts in the history of rhetoric, Carol Mattingly's exploration of clothing as rhetoric, and Roxanne Mountford's critical lens to the gender space of the pulpit. As I explore the institutional and vernacular rhetorics, I will deploy Liz Barr's concept of embodied vernacularity, which considers voices that are not in positions of leadership and may lack access to official sites or formal addresses. In contrast, institutional rhetorics allow for organizations to speak with a single authoritative voice in their interactions with the public. I will also place tremendous importance on applying an intersectional approach. Kimberly Crenshaw first used the term intersectionality to highlight the experiences of Black women, in particular with the legal system. For Crenshaw, race and discrimination combined on the bodies of Black women in a way that neither race discrimination nor gender discrimination alone captured or addressed. I want to go back to a point I made at the beginning of this presentation. While my mom prepared me to live life as a fat person, she did not prepare me for living life as white. And what I mean by this is those who are born into a position of privilege because of the color of their skin have a responsibility to be an ally and advocate for BIPOC voices. Through my research, I want to make sure that I'm not speaking solely from a white cisgender female point of view. As such, I will apply an intersectionality methodology to ensure I'm considering a wide array of voices and representing the intersection of challenges between racism, sexism, and homophobia. Now that I have provided an overview of the methodologies I will use, I will shift to explain the methods I will leverage. I will explore 10 specific recreational running events, both in-person and virtual, and will read the material artifacts associated with each event, including medals, clothing, and gear. To provide an example, I will explore the materiality of objects within women's recreational running. I refer to what Scott Barnett states in Rhetoric Through Everyday Things. He emphasizes materiality's rhetoric rather than rhetoric's materiality. The difference between these two terms is that materiality's rhetoric is the persuasive work performed by physical objects, whereas rhetoric's materiality describes the materiality of the rhetoric or language. Extending this to my research, I will consider the materials in women's running. For example, the material design of running shoes act as an agent. The smoothness of the sole of my shoes, free of rocks or gravel, shares that I run more on the treadmill than outdoors. The little hole that formed in the upper right corner shows that they've hit the pavement for more than 500 miles. I will also examine the medals for women's races and explore if they reinforce hegemonic femininity in their design. I will ask about what the sponsors tell us about the race. For example, in the New York Women's Half Marathon, they had Tiffany and Lululemon as their race sponsors, and the medal was a custom-designed Tiffany necklace engraved with 13.1. The race shirt was made by Lululemon, which sends them messages on its own, including connotations of white privilege. One of the sponsors of the Disney Princess Half Marathon is Pandora, and they had Pandora jewelry and offer many Pandora Disney charms and jewelry at the expo. Dooney and Burke, the famous purse maker, also has a special partnership with Disney, and they design Princess Dooney and Burke purses each year. These purses range in price from $200 to $400, and they sell out every year, sometimes even upon pre-order, sight unseen. Now that we understand my aim, purpose, and research questions, methodology, and methods, I want to share with you the 4 discoveries that I made that were contrary to my expectations. These include: women of color experience racism and sexism simultaneously. Women are confronted with a double bind. Online spaces do not offer respite from harassment, sexism, or racism. And the obesity epidemic is a false construct, the results of which oppress women. So why is all this significant? This is an important area of scholarship because sports do not exist in a silo, immune from and apart from the surrounding culture. The same gender, size, and race issues that prevail in our society permeate the world of sports. Given that sports represent a $70 billion industry in the United States alone, its implications have historical, economic, sociological, and psychological consequences. Additionally, research is lacking a perspective of gender and race issues in women's recreational running. The focus is usually on the professional athlete, not the everyday female recreational runner. Studies on running generally gloss over or de-emphasize the challenges women have faced in the sport, completely ignoring issues relating to race. This is timely given that the feature story in the latest issue of Runner's World magazine, just last week, is on how athletes are working to end harassment of women, LGBTQ, and BIPOC runners. Additionally, given the rampant effects of COVID, more events are moving online, which offers a new lens for which to evaluate running harassment and activism. This is important because women of color experience racism and sexism simultaneously, thereby magnifying the challenges they encounter and creating new dimensions of prejudice and oppression. Carmen Chavez explains that black men have aligned with the patriarchy, while feminism has aligned with white women. As such, black women have been left out of both. Today, I will call out the issues relating to gender and race in each of the areas that I explore, rather than discussing race as a separate topic unto itself. I do this purposefully as racism intersects with each of these issues, compounding the issues of sexism, racism, and sizeism. My initial conjecture was that the everyday rhetorics of women's recreational running would be gendered, demonstrated through sexist and violent language and materials. I expected that both institutional and vernacular rhetorics would reinforce hegemonic body ideals for women. However, I thought that we would see more sexist and classist rhetorics in institutional spaces, such as in official marketing materials, and that vernacular rhetorics, or unofficial language, would be more inclusive. I had hoped that women could leverage social media to reframe the dominant narrative, read white and heterosexist, on women's running. I also thought that the internet could serve as a space for escaping expectations for heteronormativity and could provide a space for online activism and driving change. I'm not the only one who thought this way, as scholars initially thought that the internet would erase the body. Digital technology was often viewed in dematerialized terms, with disembodied cells floating in the cloud. Frith reminds us that scholars, mostly male and white, believe that the internet would provide significant opportunities for diverse representations. However, we have discovered that digital platforms have become just one more space where hierarchies of gender, race, class, and sexuality are reproduced. We do not leave our bodies behind when we engage in the digital world. While women and men receive an equal amount of harassment online, the violent and sexual nature of the hate speech that women receive is much more intense. Additionally, black women are more likely to receive harassment online, at rates as high as 1 in 4. The effects of this violence extend beyond threatening words online and manifest into actual violence towards women. A study in 2019 found that 84% of women runners have been harassed or assaulted while running. Nearly all, 94% of these women, said their harassers were men. Kurt Streeter wrote Running While Black, published in the New York Times, which discusses the unique challenges that black runners face, which include creating exhaustive mental checklists and receiving confrontation by suspicious neighbors. This was eye-opening for me because as a female, I have certainly encountered my fair share of harassment while out on a run. One early morning in my neighborhood, a car followed slowly behind me, and I had to run through a neighbor's yard and hide behind a bush until he gave up. I can't help but imagine how much worse it would have been if I wasn't white. If I was a person of color, could I have as easily run through my neighbor's yards and hidden behind a bush to escape my stalker? Or would that have created a new set of problems? Given the violent instances that I mentioned are in person, we may be prone to think that virtual events are safer. However, this is not necessarily the case. We may think that in-person events are on the ground and virtual events are in cyberspace. However, both are partially digitally coded and physical. These constitute hybrid spaces. When runners run an event virtually, they do not run in a non-space as the word would imply. The definition of virtual is not physically existing, and of course, this is not the case in virtual running. Runners run in a physical place. Conversely, while running an in-person event, runners are not only running on the road. Mobile and locative media technology enables us to run virtually, sharing our routes, leveraging GPS to monitor our location. In this manner, our bodies imprint upon digital space, and digital space imprints upon our bodies. I am now going to shift to discuss the double binds that women face. When I first entered this area of research, my conjecture was that women would encounter expectations of heteronormative femininity. What I did not expect was that women faced a double bind with contrary expectations of both femininity and masculinity. Carlin Kors Campbell observed that women runners face a double bind when speaking in public forums. They were viewed as unwomanly if they stood on stage and spoke in masculine spaces, but at the same time they needed to display femininity on stage to gain the audience's respect. She coined this way of presenting as the feminine style. In Appropriating Dress, Carol Mattingly outlined how the same feminine style was leveraged in women's runners' dress to achieve the rhetorical effectiveness and appeal to their audience in public spaces. In The Gendered Pulpit, Roxanne Mountford argues that women use this feminine style in preaching to establish ethos and appeal to their audience. In Regendering Delivery, Lyndall Buchanan argued that women experience a double bind when leveraging their maternal ethos and rhetorical delivery, as they simultaneously embody authority and credibility while positioning themselves disadvantagedly within this gendered status quo. Congruently with a double bind, women also experience complications with these expectations and experience a double bind of both racism and sexism. A recent example of this is the criticism and scrutiny of Kamala Harris. Women runners face this double bind, as displaying feminine characteristics allow them to enter the arena, but it does not garner them respect or being taken seriously. Sports scholar Vicki Crane found that the consequences of not conforming to hegemonic femininity often include sexist discrimination. Women are punished for displaying masculine qualities, but they are also criticized when conforming to heteronormative feminine characteristics. I point to the Disney Princess Half Marathon and Divas Race Series, two of the most popular women's running events in the world, and arguably the epitome of women's running events, to provide an example of how this manifests. Each year, 18,000 runners, 90% of which are female, register for the Disney Princess Half Marathon, and the race sells out within 15 minutes. This race is characterized by women embracing hegemonically feminine characteristics, such as donning a princess crown, wearing tutus, and dressing heterosexy. However, at the same time, these events are also deemed less than, and not real running events by the broader running community. These issues are compounded by race. The term princess conjures up certain imagery, often of which a heteronormative white female who's a damsel in distress. of which Michael Bennett argues that the black female body can never be perceived. This running event is pervasive with haunting whiteness. Tammy Kennedy states that haunting whiteness describes how whiteness haunts language and acts as the backdrop that assumes white to be the unstated norm. Because Disney princesses are based on fairy tales, many of which were written by German and Dane authors, the image of the ideal woman was portrayed as white, blonde, and blue-eyed. The Divas Half Marathon series, another popular women's running event, is comprised of race events across the United States. This race provides pink tutus, pink feather boas, tiaras, and a pink princess crown medal, decked with jewels. Shirtless firemen wait at the finish line to bestow each participant. Not only do these materials reinforce gender and race bias, they are also filled with linguistic sexism, which is defined as sexist and gender-biased language. Vicky Crane states that linguistic sexism is demonstrated by adding disclaimers such as princess, ets, and divas. This othering creates an environment that implicitly favors men and perpetuates the ideology of male privilege and dominance in the sport. Even the word diva is racist, as posited by Bell Hooks and Kimberly Brown. The term diva is often used as a metaphor for female empowerment, but at the same time represents an unruliness, specifically the unruliness of black women. In a stroke of irony, this double bind could even be seen in the design of materials meant to protect women at the violent hands of men. There's an entire market of self-defense tools for female runners, many of which are sold by Divas for Defense. I own several of these products myself, including pepper spray, a stun gun, and a rape whistle hidden in a cute necklace, all in various forms of pink to allow me to be feminine while protecting myself from being raped. Because a woman shouldn't be seen as masculine or too strong, even when stopping off an attacker. As I explained, you can see how these running events and materials are embedded with both overt and covert themes of linguistic sexism, hegemonic normativity, and haunting whiteness. I now shift to fat studies. The agreement among fat studies scholars, including Kathleen Nabesco, Amy Farrell, and J.E. Oliver, are that the obesity epidemic is a false construct created to skyrocket the profits for the weight loss industry, pharmaceutical companies, and beauty brands. Body mass index, which is the primary way obesity is defined, is a false construct based on faulty science. Almost every primary industry holds a monetary stake in perpetuating weight-based stereotypes and making people not feel good about themselves, resulting in a multi-billion-dollar industry. The weight loss industry particularly affects women. Western expectations of this feminine ideal, which is the small, slim, fragile, and lacking muscular strength, is ideal because it reinforces women as powerless, obedient, and subservient to men. Sandra Barkey argues that female beauty standards are among the many ways that male-dominant society keeps women under control under the tyranny of slenderness. The kicker of this is that studies show that even with the most stringent diet and exercising of up to 4 hours a day, achieving and maintaining a weight loss of more than 10% of your body weight is not likely. We are sold the promise of a thin body when the reality is much of our body size is due to genetics and not what we eat or how we move. Kathleen Nabesco and Jana Brazil argue that while weight and BMI are not indicators of health, exercise is. Studies show that regardless of weight loss, exercise is the number one determinant in longevity and disease prevention. However, since there are limited profits in promoting exercise, this is not touted as much as medicine or diet products to lose weight. While there is consensus among fat study scholars that fat phobia has never been about health, there is a disagreement among scholars on the relationship between weight and race. Sabrina Strings, author of Fearing the Black Body, argues that the contemporary ideal of the slender body is racist. The healthcare system in America pushes the thin agenda on black women, focusing almost entirely on the reduction of weight as a remedy to disease. Conversely, Oliver argues that a large posterior on women can be seen as a sign of strength and sexuality among Black and Latino populations, and that in America, white women in particular have been the target for fat bias. As it relates to my research, it's helpful to understand how these race and fat bias rhetorics affect participation in running events. Because running is often marketed to white women as a way to control their body and lose weight, entire groups of people are left out of this narrative. And I question, how does this affect women of all races? Women who are not seeking weight loss. Those who can't visualize themselves being physically active. This brings me back full circle to my opening personal story. My mom was considered obese according to BMI charts. She was told her entire life she was less than. She was given the message that she couldn't and shouldn't run. Almost every waking moment of her life was preoccupied with her body size. For what? to help fuel the profits of wealthy corporations? When I read the research that confirmed obesity, BMI, and body weight are all false constructs and that fat prejudice is not about health, it's about money, power, and control, I was infuriated. I wish she would have known that health comes in all sizes, that she didn't have to be ashamed of her body, that she could have still moved her body and improved her health without worrying about her body size. Because of my mom's struggles with her weight, she prepared me my entire life for living life as a fat person. But she prepared me in a way that reinforced the dominant narratives of hegemonic femininity, perpetuating the vernacular of women needing to control her body. Not to be attracted to men, but to communicate her morality, her self-control, her ability to control her desires. These vernacular rhetorics reinforce that fat women don't run or move their bodies. They should be ashamed and try to shrink, not embrace their bodies and try to take up the space that they deserve. I still struggle to identify with myself as a runner. So far this year, I've run 3,614 miles, but I still struggle to view myself as anyone but the little fat girl who just wanted to fit in. My mom died in March of 2016. 1 week after she died, I was running a local half marathon when suddenly I felt her presence next to me. I could see her as if she was really there. But it wasn't the mom I knew. It was her as a little girl, running along beside me with a smile as wide as the moon and pigtails bobbing on her shoulders. She told me, "I'm free now, Stacy. I'm free from my body and I can run." Tears came to my eyes and didn't stop flowing until I crossed the finish line. My mom didn't feel free to run until she was released from the shackles of the tyranny of slenderness, the harassment, and the patriarchal expectations to conform her body to hegemonic norms. I hope that through my work I can untangle the rhetorics and institutional vernacular spaces to shed light on the false constructs that keep women shackled and unable to realize the potential of their body. I want to uncover the expectations of heteronormativity, racism, and sexism in the sport of women's recreational running from a feminological perspective. In other words, rather than focus on the professional athlete or an understanding of women's experiences from a theoretical perspective, I seek to uncover the real, everyday, lived experience of women of all races and how they experience misogyny, racism, and sexism. In short, I'm doing this not only in honor of my mom, but for all women. Thank you. Any questions?